guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. Today I will be filming my February wrap-up. I ended up reading 11 books in the month of February, which I think is pretty good considering how short it actually is. And today I'm going to talk about all of them. I've prepared a bunch of stats for you today because you guys seem to enjoy them and I enjoyed them too, especially because then you can go ahead and compare like separate months. And this month I'll try to actually put something on the screen. In total, I read 3,853 pages, which comes to an average of 138 a day. This is a little bit higher, about 10 pages more than in January, so yay. In terms of rating, I have 1 1-star, 4 2-stars, which is really tragic, 2 3-stars, 1 4-star, and 3 5-star reads. In terms of average rating, it comes to a pretty exact 3 stars. I also wanted to take a look at the settings for the books that I read this month. Funnily enough, 6 of the 11 books I read this month were set in England. 1 was set in Italy/in Germany, 1 in India, 1 in China and Nepal, 1 in the US, and 1 in Afghanistan. In terms of gender, I had 6 female authors and 5 male. Release years 1 1818, 2 1997, 6 books were set between 2000 and 2017, and 2 were new releases in 2018. 9 of the 11 books were written by new to me authors, and also 9 of the 11 were what I would consider hyped books or fairly popular books, with only 2 that are a little bit more obscure. And that's it for the stats. Now let's jump into the reviews. As I did in my January wrap-up, I will be putting these in order of worst to best book that I read this month. So let's jump into it. The absolute worst book that I read this month, unfortunately, was The Dumb House by John Burnside. I'm really sad I didn't enjoy this book because the premise sounded so interesting to me, but the book overall and the execution were just like so lacking in my eyes that I just ended up really frustrated. This book follows a man called Luke who's kind of obsessed with the Dumb House experiment, I can't say that word, experiment that a kind of Persian prince, I think, performed, where he just like raised his children, I think, in complete silence. I'm not sure if it's his children, but he raised children in complete silence, and he wanted to find out if language is something that's inherent in human beings or if it's something that needs to be taught. And there were like 2 schools of thought, where it's like the religious people and the scientists, I don't even know. But basically this man is obsessed with that experiment and he wants to recreate it on his own children. I know that a lot of people enjoy this book and love this book because of the prose and the writing, which is quite nice at times, but for me it didn't have enough substance to it for it to make too much of a difference. I kind of feel like the premise in the title is a little bit misleading because the book only kind of touches on that experiment in passing. It's mainly just a story of Luke's life, and he's kind of a sociopath or a psychopath, I'm not really sure which, and he's like the very stereotypical like standard that you know from like movies or whatever, where he like tortures and dissects animals as a kid, and he's like super obsessed with his mom and like just weird things when she dies. Like, I don't even, you know, like if you've read books and seen movies about psychopaths, then this will all sound familiar, and to me it just seemed so unoriginal. I have been so oversaturated with that kind of trope and that kind of character that I just like couldn't care anymore. It's not scandalous and it's not shocking to me anymore when someone with a complete lack of empathy does things that normal humans would never do. Like, I've just been so desensitized to that I just like don't care anymore. Also, apart from his psychopathy, there is nothing to Luke's character. Like, he does not have any personality traits besides the fact that he's clearly mentally disturbed. So I didn't want to read about his life. It felt so boring to me. I actually almost fell asleep several times when reading this book, and that really never happens. Except with another book I also read this month. So this was the month of me falling asleep while reading boring books, and this unfortunately was one of them. The next book I was kind of debating whether I should give 1 or 2 stars, and I ended up giving it 2 because There were some parts that I enjoyed, and definitely more parts I enjoyed than with The Dumb House, and that is Viper Wine by Hermione Eyre. This book sounded so fascinating to me when I heard about it first, and again, the premise and the book itself do not fully match up, which is a shame. This book is historical fiction, and it's about this woman that existed in real life. Her name was Venetia Stanley, and she was married to Lord... Is he a lord? No, not a lord. Sir Kenelm Digby, who was a scientist. And she was a famous beauty in her youth. And the book takes place in like 1633, I think. She's like, I don't know, 31 or 32, and she's really struggling with aging, and like with the disappearance of her beauty, because that's kind of basically all that she based her identity on as a young woman, and now that's like gone, even though it's kind of scary to think that. I mean, I guess maybe in 1630s, like 31 or 32 is like old. But honestly, I'm not that far away from that age, and it kind of scares me to think that like at that time I should start worrying about being old. Her husband, who really loves her, is like really supportive of her and like really wants her to kind of age gracefully, but she is obsessed with youth, and so she's like constantly tracking down new things that could keep her young, and then she discovers this apothecary. She discovers this like pharmacist who prescribes her this wonderful concoction called Viper Wine. I'm not quite sure what it consists of, but I think that there's the urine of a pregnant horse is in it, and also obviously vipers. Yeah, it's some disgusting shit, but she starts drinking it every day, and then you know, the thing spreads. It's like a mania that spreads, and lots of other women are also taking it in secret, and yeah, the story kind of goes from there, but also that's kind of all there is to it at the same time, which I found really disappointing. I really enjoyed the parts of the book that dealt with Venetia and her like pursuit of youth and beauty. I really like enjoyed getting to know her mind. Like, I had a morbid curiosity for the weird shit that she would do to keep young, but then there was so much weird shit in this book apart from the things that had to do directly with Venetia that I just like was like, what the fuck am I reading here? What is this book? I understand that this is literary fiction, and so the book is extra trying to be like super smart, but oh my fucking god, I was so annoyed at everything and so bored. There's so much irrelevant shit in here. There's so many points of views that make no sense. I'm like, why are we following this person throughout her life? There's a woman called Mary Tree who doesn't even relate to the story at all until like the last chapter, but we follow her constantly, and I'm like, I do not care. I don't care. Why am I reading about you? Another thing that's annoying is Kenelm Digby as a character. This guy is so stoned out of his mind. Like, I don't even know. At least that's what he comes across as. He's a scientist, but he believes in like sympathy, so he believes that he can cure people by treating that have like infections, but treating the thing that caused the infection. Like, he won't treat the actual wound, he'll like do something with the, I don't know, he believes that the atoms will transfer. I don't honestly know because it's really confusing, but that's kind of his field of like research and whatever. And also, when he meditates, he can time travel somehow, and this happens throughout the book constantly, where he will somehow, which I still don't understand how, get in touch with the future, and like he'll find like a page with JavaScript on it, or talk to people about like nanobiotechnology. Like, I don't even know, it's so fucking confusing, and I do not understand the point of including that in the book. I think that the message this book was trying to send is that like, oh, obsession with beauty is timeless, and everybody always wants to be beautiful, and there's like never gonna be a cure for aging. But first of all, that message is so on the nose. It's like, well, duh, who would have thought? And secondly, that's all of that confusingness is not necessary to achieve that goal. It could have been done so much simpler. This is, by the way, the book that I almost fell asleep to. Have I mentioned that? I don't know. I fell asleep multiple times reading this. Not just almost, actually fell asleep. Aside from Kenelm Digby's like time travel, whatever that is. The book in general often like connects future and past, but in such an erratic way that it's really, really hard to follow and doesn't, again, make sense. It seems very forced, I guess, to be like extra clever that way. In the same vein, the book kind of jumps in time and place and point of view completely unannounced, like from one paragraph to the next, and it's really hard to follow. The book is really verbose, it's really just pretentious and not in a good way, and I didn't care for it, so I do not recommend reading this. I'm really sad because I really liked the story of Venetia and I like wanted to know more about her, but this book could have been 100 pages of just the scenes that directly relate to her, and I would have been a lot happier. Another unfortunate 2-star read that I wanted to rate much higher, but physically couldn't, was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The book had such potential, I swear. So I really, really wanted to like this, especially because at the beginning of reading it, I was so into it. I loved reading about Victor's family, and I thought they had the most wonderful family life. I always feel like, in classics especially, the family is always really at war with each other or like never talk to one another, and it's never like a functional family, right? It's always an unhappy situation. I was just really, really pleasantly surprised by how much they genuinely loved each other and cared for each other, and everything was great. And I was also really interested in Victor's journey to like creating the monster, but then from that point on, everything went to shit in my eyes. And the biggest problem, surprisingly, turned out to be Victor himself. Let me just set the scene. This guy goes and creates a human being out of nothing. He creates a monster. He keeps calling it monster. He never gives it a name. He wakes it up, and the minute it awakes, he's like, oh fuck, what have I done? I regret everything. And he runs for the hills and does not turn back. I'm pretty sure he has no interactions with the monster for like 2 years. And then the monster finally tracks him down and it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You put me in this life and then you just left, and all I wanted is to be loved and like have connections with other human beings, but because you made me so ugly, they all are repulsed by me and they hate me, and it turns him jaded and it turns him into a shitty person. And all he does is like go to Victor Frankenstein and tell him, look, I just want you to make me a partner for me so that we can be together. I can have someone that's on my side that is like my companion, and I will just fuck off and leave you alone. And you know what Victor does? He's like, no, you're a monster. You wretched thing. Get the fuck off. I don't care. Just go and die. This is not my problem. Bye. And then he's surprised when the monster starts killing his entire family. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And the book wants us to feel sympathetic for Victor. In what universe? In what universe am I gonna be on Victor's side when he creates a monster that's not actually a monster except in appearance? And then he's like, well, not my problem. I don't have time for this. I don't care. Oh my god. I hate Victor with a burning passion. And what I hate even more is that this book, I feel like, missed the opportunity to send a message of appearance isn't everything. It's much more important what's on the inside. Your soul and your mind and those things are much more valuable, and you're still deserving of love and kindness no matter what you look like, as long as you're a good person. But no! Instead, the book is basically like, well, don't fuck with nature, and yeah, because it's gonna come haunting you, and also monsters are bad. And Victor is such a poor person who loses everything just because of one mistake. And I'm like, no. You deserve everything that's coming your way. I'm sorry. I was particularly annoyed at this book, like the last third of it, which is pretty much exclusively Victor like feeling sorry for himself and whining about his life being so horrible now, when all I could do is like facepalm so hard at his stupidity and idiocy and his horrible character. So I will not rant about this book any longer, but Victor Frankenstein is the worst person ever, and I hated it. So again, I'm really sad I didn't enjoy it, because I think it's, for a classic, it's very readable and it's very engaging, and Especially, as I said, the first half or so I really enjoyed. But after that I could not get with the book and I was just like mad at it the entire time, so... I have not ranted this much about a classic in a long time. My last two 2-star reads I will mention together because they're part of a series, and I read Romancing the Duke and Say Yes to the Marquess by Tessa Dare. I read this book after another book that I'll mention in my 5-star reads that was quite heavy as in terms of subject matter and everything, and I just like wanted something lighthearted to pick up, so for some reason I chose to go for those because I just saw like some people talk about them recently and I was like, okay, well, let's just try them out. Because I heard that they're kind of good for historical fiction romance. Like, it's very rare. Very rare to find like unproblematic romance books, adult romance books, so. I really enjoyed them, like, especially the first half of both of them I really quite enjoyed. They're very samey in terms of premise and also in terms of like everything else. The series is called Castles Ever After, I think, and the premise is that a lady or someone, whatever, like young woman, inherits a castle. The woman inherits a castle, and then in the first book there's a guy already living there, like a duke already living there, and he's like, no, it's my castle, and then they get into a dispute. And the second book, the woman is supposed to marry this guy's brother, but he's gone and he has not, they've been engaged for 8 years and he's like not ever shown really any much interest in her, and then she wants to quit, like end the engagement, and the guy's brother is like, nah, you shouldn't, and then obviously they get together. Whatever. It's nothing groundbreaking, honestly, which is why I gave it 2 stars. I thought the story was fun, and especially in the first half, both of the books were quite funny and like witty as well, and I actually laughed out loud at some points of it, which I was like pleasantly surprised by. There's nothing problematic in it. The women are fairly independent. The men are really like kind of meek and emotionally stunted, and he's like, you know, building up again by the women. So yeah, it's okay. It was okay, but it's just okay. Like, there's nothing else I could say about it. Moving on to my 2 3-star reads. I have 2, right? The first is a book that I got for Christmas, and that's Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. This is a YA contemporary, and it follows this girl called Asa who suffers with OCD, and her former friend, whose father is a millionaire, has disappeared because of some scandal, and they're trying to track him down, basically. I'm really surprised I actually gave this book such a high rating, considering the fact that I don't really read YA contemporaries and I'm not really the biggest fan of them. But I did find this book quite fun, quite cute to read. It barely has any plot to speak of. It kind of felt really, really rushed at times because there's kind of like stuff happening in the beginning fairly quickly, and then in the middle part nothing happens, and it's all about Asa and her OCD and like her dealing with that, and then again the conclusion comes like at the drop of a hat just to kind of be done with it. I also felt like Asa as a character wasn't particularly fleshed out besides her OCD. I always find it really annoying when characters have like one big defining characteristic, and apart from that there's really nothing to them. I do understand that if you have a mental illness, that can often kind of overshadow your actual and true personality, and that is something, a thought that Asa struggles with herself in the book, but I still wish there had been more to her. You definitely have to suspend your disbelief, as with I think most John Green books, in terms of like these characters not being really realistic, especially since they never really act like teenagers, which, as I've mentioned in my Goodreads review of this book, I am just confused why John Green doesn't just start writing adult books, because his characters never act like teenagers. The only thing that really defines them as such is their actual age. I think his writing style is really beautiful. He has some really gorgeous phrases going, and I mean, I think he has potential, but I just wish he would stop writing this kind of books, because I think that this is just, his talent, I think, is wasted on YA books, is just what I'm saying. You know, especially since he clearly wants to write older characters, given that he makes his teenagers so, like, precocious. all the time. My last 3-star book was The Princess Diaries by Carrie Fisher. This book is basically just an account of Carrie Fisher's affair with Harrison Ford on the set of the first Star Wars. She kind of looks back on her life a little bit in this book, but I think that she's written other books that do that in a more detailed way. So if you care about her as a person as a whole, this book is probably not for you. It does rely heavily on diaries that she wrote during that time, which really turned out to be like poetic at times. Like she has some poems in here that I think are actually really good, and yeah, it's just really interesting. I like reading about celebrities and like their private lives, and I just love that she put that in a book. I don't think she's the best writer in terms of like prose, but it's still fun, it's entertaining, and kind of hard to read at times as well, because she obviously has like this unrequited love going with Harrison Ford, and he's like really kind of harsh and not really treating her in the best way, and so you kind of just like, it's hard to imagine Carrie Fisher as you know her like from TV and whatever in that kind of a meek position. Alright, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty with my first 4-star read. I think it was actually 4.5-star read, I don't know. But that was The Widows of Malabar Hill by Sajata Massi. This was one of the 2018 releases that I actually have done a complete individual review of, so I will link that in the cards, I think up here. And you should go watch it because this book is great, and I will talk more in detail about it in that video, obviously. And now it's time for the 5 stars. Sorry this video is so obnoxiously long, but you'll just have to deal with it. The first 5-star read is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This is obviously a very famous book, and I'm so ashamed I haven't read it sooner because it was fucking amazing. This book is set in Afghanistan and follows 2 women that are almost like 20 years apart in age. The first is called Mariam, and we follow her from the time she's about 5 years old. She is a bastard, so her parents were not married when she was born, and her dad actually has like his whole family with like 3 other proper wives and children, and she just lives with her mother, who's kind of a bad person, but also a sad person. So the book kind of follows her as she grows up and as she enters an arranged marriage and moves to another city. When Mariam is about 20 years old, a girl called Layla is born. They don't really have much interaction until several years later, when circumstances bring the 2 of them together, and even though it takes some time, they develop a very strong friendship that's always like a mother-daughter relationship, and it just follows their lives. It also follows the history, I guess, of Afghanistan from the war with the Soviet Union, where women still enjoyed quite a lot of freedoms actually, to the taking over of warlords, to again the beginning of the Taliban, I guess, occupation. The scope of this book is enormous, and it incorporates a lot of historical facts and elements that I really appreciated, because I barely know anything about Afghanistan, honestly, like nothing before even reading this book. So I'm so glad I did, because it really educated me on a lot of things that I knew nothing about. This book was just like magnificently written. I was so involved in these characters' lives. I cared so much, maybe too much, because a lot of things that happen to them are horrible and really hard to read, and there were times, especially towards the ending, where I was fully crying. It's definitely not something I recommend picking up if you're already in like a bad mood or like in a sad mood, because this is just gonna make it worse. It's still something I really wish everyone would read, because it's just so fantastic. It has a lot of very positive and like hopeful messages still in the midst of all that chaos. And it's just really important, I think, in like teaching us about other cultures. So I really recommend reading this book. Second to last, I have Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This is a non-fiction book about Jon Krakauer's ascent of Mount Everest in 1996, yes. The particular climbing season is very famous because a lot of people died, and there's been movies about it and documentaries about it. And this book is written just from the perspective of someone who was actually there, so I think it has a lot more authority on actually telling the story correctly. Besides that, the book also talks a lot about the history of Mount Everest itself, and it's really tailored to be read by kind of an Everest noob who doesn't really know much about it. So it gives you like all the necessary information. You need to put the events of 1996 in the proper context. I was so into this book. I read it in a fairly short amount of time because I couldn't put it down. This is one of the few nonfiction books that just kept me thinking about it even when I wasn't reading it. I kept wanting to know more, and it's just so well written and engaging and terrifying too at times. I honestly was like sitting there under my blanket on my bed shivering in sympathy with these people, and I can't even express to you how much I love it. I will recommend this to any and everyone who hasn't already grown sick of me talking about Everest now, because this idea just fascinates me. I will never ever climb Mount Everest because I think if you have a family or anyone that cares about you, it's quite a selfish endeavor because you're probably gonna die. Not probably, but it's highly likely that you will die. So I don't think I'll do it ever, but doesn't mean I can't be fascinated with the people that do choose to try. And finally, my very favorite book that I read in February of 2018 was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I also filmed an individual book review for this, as I'm doing with all 2018 releases that I choose to pick up and read. I adored this book, like so much. I think that everyone should read this. There should be much more hype about it than there is because it's such a masterpiece of like mystery and crime, and I can't wait until the time I get to reread it. So I really recommend you watch that review and go and pick it up because it's really good. It is really good. And that is finally it for my February wrap up. Thank you for sticking around until the very end. I really appreciate it. As I said, I didn't have the best reading month, but I still got through quite a few things that I've been wanting to read. So let me know in the comments down below how your reading month went. What was your favorite book that you read in February? And please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're new here. I upload every Tuesday and Friday, and I will see you then with another video. Have a lovely week. Bye!